Why am I, sir? I've never used them before.
I'm in love with the human race. I think the human animal is really a fine animal. This combination of fur and nakedness. I'm really proud of them. From where they've come from being a hairy ape and Australopithecus to what they've done now just staggers me. What is behind it? I can only give my feelings are that I don't believe in the usual personal God. I do feel there's a gigantic plan afoot, probably more complex than anything you can ever get into holy books. But I feel that we're an important part of it. Whatever this thing is that is consciousness is very much a part of it. I don't know what we're hooked to. The wisdom of the plan is that we're trapped on this little planet, this speck of dust here. I have no doubt that we will grow to the point that we'll be able to attempt star travel. I think that will be our growing up period, our adolescence to adulthood. And then we probably will meet the first other intelligent forms.
Gene Roddenberry has said that his Star Trek series is rooted in the revolutionary thought of Lenin's vision of a galactic federation. It's been widely reported that his Star Trek series originated with Vice Admiral and Navy intelligence operative Leslie Stevens, creator of The Outer Limits television series, and that Stevens was probably responsible for the bulk of the Star Trek content. Stevens also created Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers in the 25th century. He was a leading expert in aerospace engineering and headed top Navy aerospace facilities at various points during his career. According to internationally recognized author and geopolitical scholar Dr. Michael Salla, Stevens' connections were so deep that the intelligence community could have been feeding him classified material and/or speculative briefings to sound out before the public in a highly charged dramatic context. Stevens had a hotline straight to the highest echelons of the technocratic military establishment. He was naval attaché in Moscow from 1947 to 1950, was on the National Security Council under Eisenhower, and was instrumental in the formation of NASA and other more exotic projects. His resume is such that he was a very likely candidate for membership on Majestic 12 or a similar working group. Given Stevens' role in military intelligence and his lifelong deep interest in esotericism, the Gnostic themes in the franchise's long history have been credited to Stevens. The unaired pilot episode, The Cage, and its later reworking in The Menagerie, is so saturated with Gnostic Freemasonic cosmology it's obnoxious. Captain Pike, a character created to represent Sovereign Grand Commander of Freemasonry Albert Pike, responds to a distress call from a planet run as a laboratory-type human zoo, operated by big-brained androgynous cousins of Crowley's Iwas, called the Telosians. The Telosians are emotionless telepathic masters of illusion who use their illusory abilities to create fake reality scenarios and then insert their human subjects, which they see as primitive animals, so they can passively observe and study their habits and rituals. It's become a deviant compulsion for these characters, a somewhat addictive source of entertainment, rather than for the sake of obtaining useful scientific knowledge. In the episode Return of the Archons, Beta 3 is a prison planet inhabited by a mind-controlled, cult-like population that rather conveniently looks like America in the mid-20th century. Speaks volumes. In an article in the New York Times, speaking on the influence of Roddenberry's Star Trek, which appears to have been a social engineering effort targeting boomers, quote, feeding on this tension, science fiction and futurism entered their quote-unquote golden age by the 1950s and 60s, both predicting the bright future that would replace the Cold War. Technological advances would automate society, the necessity of work would fade away, industrial wealth would be distributed as a universal basic income, and an age of leisure and vitality would follow. Humans would continue to voyage into space, creating off-Earth colonies and perhaps making new extraterrestrial friends in the process, end quote.
There will be fewer and fewer jobs that a robot cannot do better. And I want to be clear that these are not things that I wish would happen. These are simply things that I think probably will happen. If my assessment is correct and they probably will happen, then we need to say, what are we going to do about it? And I think some kind of a universal basic income is going to be necessary. Now, the output of goods and services will be extremely high. So with automation, there will come abundance. Almost everything will get very cheap. The much harder challenge is, how do people then have meaning? They derive their meaning from their employment. If you're not needed, if there's not a need for your labor, what's the meaning?
It's suggested that Roddenberry was further connected through his spin-off Deep Space Nine to an influential UFO cult called the Council of Nine out of the Esalen Institute. Esalen was founded by theosophist, master hypnotist, and two-term captain in the U.S. Army Chemical Center in Edgewood, Maryland, Andrija Puharich, who earlier in 1948 created the Round Table Foundation to study psychic phenomena and wrote several books, one of his earliest works titled The Sacred Mushroom, in which he sees these compounds as this chemical stargate. The U.S. military-industrial complex, guided by men such as Allen Dulles and Nelson Rockefeller, and spurred by the Rand Corporation's 1949 Janus Report on the importance of mind control for national security, believed in the necessity to beat the Soviets at the game of psychic warfare. It launched the research effort into human consciousness and neuroelectronics, carried out by pioneering scientists and military officers such as Drs. Jose Delgado, John Lilly, Timothy Leary, and Andrija Puharich, all attached to major academic institutions. Puharich's Round Table Foundation's central figure since 1952 was a visiting Indian sage and medium from Bombay named Maharshi Vinod, whose alleged supernatural channeling powers were reflected in the creation of the Star Trek series by a member of the Puharich group, Gene Roddenberry, in 1966. Puharich, who had begun his work at the Edgewood Military Laboratory with funding from the OSS, allegedly at the behest of the American Defense Department, and prominent Freemason and former Vice President Henry Wallace, the man responsible for putting the mystical pyramid on the back of the US dollar bill, in the early 1970s he invited the Israeli medium and intelligence asset Uri Geller to the US and submitted him to a battery of tests. Puharich was considered a master in alternative worldview creation and narcotic-enhanced hypnotism. When Puharich brought Vinod in 1952, he relayed a series of messages he claims are from the quote-unquote Council of Nine, a group of ascended masters who were once worshipped as the Great Ennead of ancient Egypt. The Great Ennead were the 9 gods of ancient Egypt who reigned over the whole world from Heliopolis, Egypt's capital city of the sun, for centuries, until other conquering factions like the Greeks and later the Romans impacted that influence. The change, however, wasn't complete until the arrival of Jesus, of which the Ennead then seemed to simply fade into oblivion, or as the mystery teachings go, they retreated back to the heavenly realm, claiming to return at a later date in their own second coming. An interesting read in this regard is The Stargate Conspiracy. I'm in the middle of this book now, in which the author points out that it was infamous occultist Aleister Crowley and his wife Rose who first introduced the idea of the 9 gods of the Great Ennead through their magical working in Cairo in 1904, which greatly inspired later claims of contact with ancient Egyptian gods that not only control the universe but also created man. The account goes that Puharich engaged narco-hypnosis on Geller in his research experiments to try to discover from where his paranormal spoon-bending abilities derived. Geller claimed he was channeling an entity called Spectra, who is supposed to be a conscious supercomputer aboard a spaceship. Puharich suggested that Geller might be in connection with the Nine, of which Spectra supposedly agreed. It was later suggested that the Nine had programmed Geller as a child. Everyone who came to Puharich for his research was hypnotized, and every one of them came away believing they were in contact with extraterrestrials. In 1973, Geller rejected any connection to the Nine, concluding that the hypnotic trance, the leading questions, and the post-hypnotic suggestions from Puharich tampered with his own subconscious. Puharich takes channeler Vinod's claims so seriously that he started a new institute called Lab 9, devoted to the teachings of the Nine. In November of 1952, Puharich presented a paper on ESP and psychological warfare at the Pentagon Conference. In the following month, he brought the Nine through Vinod, and by 1953, Puharich was officially placed into psychological warfare research that focused on induced ESP mind control in the form of hearing radio waves via implants, psychedelics, narco-hypnosis, MK-Ultra experiments on prisoners and mental ward patients, in collaboration with Professor of Philosophy Oliver I. Reiser, chairman of the International Committee on Scientific Humanism. The 9, however, was part of a military psychological warfare plan for a new global ET Ancient Aliens religion. Puharich had connections to a lineage of theosophical, Luciferian, UN-connected mystics and Fabian socialists like people from the Alice A. Bailey camp, her many contemporaries, and their notion of a scientific humanist religion that's needed for social control in the post-apocalyptic world. I always found it curious that part of Marshall Applewhite's message echoed the desires of the Fabian transhumanists in his insistence that they needed to shed their physical bodies in order to board a special spacecraft to escape the deliberate nuking of the Earth so it can be spaded over and restored for a new race of humans. Puharich embraced the apocalyptic view that nuclear radiation would help the Earth evolve spiritually, which he called radio eugenics as radiation hormesis.
You know, intelligent human beings should realize that everything has their cycle. They have their season. They have their beginning. They have their end. They have cycles. We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another human civilization.